All right, can I have a motion, please?
Because you got that locally, and the other stuff is far.
So I wasn't even gonna come tonight. I'm glad I did.
Into open session? That's all I have to say, right?
Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? Roll call vote. Rochelle?
Aye.
Susan?
Aye.
Philip?
Aye.
Peter? Eric? Lorene? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. Right? Order of business. There's no public appearances today. Can I have a motion for the consent agenda?
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call vote. Rochelle?
Aye.
Susan? Philip?
Aye.
Peter? Eric? Lorene? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. All right, moving on to recognitions.
Okay, first recognition I'd like to announce is based on the consent agenda you just approved. Nicole Thibodeau will be, leaving us at the end of next month. She's been with us for 10 years and really excited, for her and her new opportunities moving forward. Very sad to leave her, see her leave certainly, but very appreciative of what she has brought to the district and her dedication over these last 10 years. So thank you, Nicole.
Give a round of applause for Nicole.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That's what we do at Overture when it's really great.
Hey, all right, and we have certainly some student recognitions as well. Our Cottage Grove Elementary schools are in the midst of the Great Kindness Challenge. This is a nationwide challenge where students will participate in different activities and dress up in ways that relate to kindness. Our schools are holding food drives this week, and Taylor Prairie students recently got to paint kindness rocks that will be used in the school garden. Our high school DECA team participated in the district competition recently. 25 students received medals and 16 students are moving forward for the state competition next month. The GDS, Gender and Sexuality Alliance, or GSA, organized a school-wide lesson about breaking down stereotypes that culminated in students writing down a part of their identity. These identities are then melded together in an I Am Wall display to highlight various identities of both students and staff at GDS. Congratulations to the MG21 Middle Campus Lego League as they won the Engineering Excellence Award in December and made it into sectionals. And lastly, congratulations to the 8 high school students who received awards for the 2023 MLK Outstanding Young Person Award. Each year, the Urban League of Greater Madison celebrates the achievements of outstanding young men and women across Dane County in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and there's a list of students on our Facebook page.
All right. Next is correspondence and announcements.
You just have, as far as the announcements, for the spring election, the ballot draw was done recently, and so the information on the ballot is there for your review.
Moving on to administrative reports, superintendent report.
I actually don't have a report tonight. We have a couple of discussion items later on, and we've had a number of meetings here this month, so nothing new to report this evening.
Moving on to board reports. First is the State Education Convention. So do board members want to share a little bit about the convention? Susan?
Again, I went to a workshop on every opportunity. The first one I went to was the governance taught by the WSB staff, and it talked about the board role. And again, one of the words I heard in almost every single workshop is data. You look at the data, you assess the data, and then you make whatever changes you need to make. It's the whole continuous improvement process. And Peter, remember that we did that for, talked about that for years. And Dan still has that embedded in our things. But it talked about how important it is for the board to set an expectation for reporting out so you know. And right now, the best information we kind of tend to get is out of teaching, learning, and equity, because Elizabeth has looked at what's affecting us, what do we need to know, and how, and then bring it forward. But they set up basically, and it's something our we've talked about communication, but setting up scheduling for the information. I mean, you can't as one board member, which I've learned over the years, over and over again. Just ask for the information, because you probably won't get it. But if as a board, you think about what it is you want and you want to see, then you set that up, set up a schedule, and then you can work together as a team to make that happen. And one of the school districts I listened to, it actually hired a data analyst to work for their school district. So, I mean, it's impressive what you can do. That was effectively a theme throughout everything. The other thing is, I went to a few superintendent evaluations, superintendent search, those kinds of things. And I have to say, you guys have done a really nice job as a board in the process that we're using and going forward.
Peter?
I went to, like the, follow a theme, go to a couple of different, go to some of these presentations. And one of them I went to the WASB superintendent evaluation discussion, just to refresh myself on how they do it, because we're getting a new superintendent, we're going to have to establish a new process. And one of the things that was really interesting about their process is they do something different for first year and subsequent years with the superintendent, which is, I think, something to keep in mind. But we can, tends to slide the first year because there's so much going on, and they have a process that kind of accommodates that, so you can sort of get off on the right foot. And you're required to do an evaluation, but they're trying to help you do one that's sort of relevant. But it's hard the first year because you haven't done any of the long-term goal setting or those sorts of things, and so they have a process that they try to accommodate that. In addition to some things on wellness and compensation and attracting and retaining employees and so on, there was one interesting I went to sort of by accident, but in 2021, the Janesville School District fell victim to a ransomware attack, where they lost their network for 3 weeks, to the things like they couldn't get into the buildings because they have a key card system. And, eventually, they found people with keys, but, who has a key, right? They didn't lose a lot of data because that was all backed up in the cloud. But, it was extremely disruptive. Once they got into the buildings, then, well, we don't have computers. That's okay. We can go back to the way we did things without computers. And they went to copy things. And guess what? Copies are connected to the internet and don't function. And so not only did they talk about the importance of, reviewing your security processes and making sure that, you're robust and following best practices, but that you also have a recovery or a disaster plan when it comes to this, as well as other possibilities, things going on, is how are you going to deal with, assume that's going to happen. The statistic is that 12 school districts in Wisconsin had significant issues with, network attacks, disgruntled employees, external factors, phishing, things like losses of data, theft of data, things like that. And, it was expensive for Janesville, and there was a big loss in terms of teaching. And so it's sort of important to understand where we are and review these things. So sometime in the future, I think we should take a look at that and look and see what we've got and how we're set up in this district. Particularly what is overlooked, which is the recovery plan. Interestingly enough, there's also a network of 400 volunteers that make a crisis response team, a cyber terrorism crisis response team particularly for schools in the state. And apparently the attack happened on a Sunday afternoon, and within a couple of hours, they had people on site that were helping with them resolve the issues that was happening. Sort of raise the awareness about, something to pay attention to, because it does happen.
And for me, I just want to say that I enjoy the ability to collaborate with other districts and connecting. And then even as a board, I feel like we had a really great connection. So I thoroughly enjoyed this convention.
I would just say, I don't have any specific reports to bring to the board, but I would say I wish this was something that was held shortly after a board member joins the board, because it was a great educational experience as a new board member, and it's too bad that it's, 3/4 of a year after you join the board. If it was in, say, June or something, that would be great, because the sessions were super informative on how the district works, or how a district works, and all the basics, the finance, the legal, all that kind of stuff. So
If it can't be in the coldest week of the year,
Right.
every year, you
Right.
don't get the full experience.
30 years almost. It's
I
been,
think this was record cold, Peter. This was,
What I really remember is the board member that was 50 years on the board, like, that is
Not our
amazing.
board.
Not our board, not our board, but I forgot what district that was, but he was 50 years, yeah.
so, Lorraine, I just want to add one thing. There was a general session, and part of the general session, the speaker talked about doing an analysis of people stopping and helping people when they needed help, and showed who stopped and who didn't stop, And I thought, it's so hard, because you may be somewhere where you don't feel safe and it's hard to stop. So we were leaving, and of course, it's been freezing cold in Milwaukee, and we come out to the parking lot, and the woman right next to us, her car won't start. And she said, "Could you jump my car?" And we said, "Sure, you jump." Sure. And jumped a car, and I thought, "Oh, that's really cool." That's why we're here, because we want to help.
Excellent. Krishna?
Thank you so much. Although I wasn't in attendance, I just had a few comments. Firstly, if anyone here has been serving over 50 years, don't worry. To me, you don't look a day over 21. The next thing is that I really appreciated Susan's comments on data communication and working as a team, as well as Peter's remarks on the threats and opportunities faced by school districts in this day and age. I truly believe that MG's openness as a district is critical to its thriving success over the past few years, especially in regards to analyzing the challenges that face us and having the communication and willpower necessary to be able to tackle that as a team. That requires effort day in and day out. And I feel that it has been very reflective, both in my role as a student representative and the board's willingness to be able to collaborate on all the challenges and solutions that we now face. Specifically, I want to focus on the avenues we have towards youth advocacy and engagement, to which I believe, even though it's my senior year, in the years to come, there is unlimited potential to be tapped there. Specifically, I believe that there are several risks, like Peter mentioned, such as cybersecurity, but also so many things that have come before this board that require a plurality of voices to discuss and to discover ways to move forward with. And as a result, I believe that despite our current transitions as a board from this year to the next, I believe that an orientation towards equity, opportunity, and openness will continue to allow Monona Grove to thrive, even as its makeup shifts from its board all the way down to its student body. So I want to take a second to thank everyone who was in attendance of this meeting and for all the effort that's been put towards this board, both in the past and for the future, to make sure that those lessons go as far as possible.
Thank you, Krishna. All right, moving on to the Monona Grove Education Foundation. Susan?
The Monona Grove Education Foundation met on January 9th, 2024. Dan was reporting that he's retiring, and the board was in the process of choosing a search group at that time. They reelected their current slate of officers: Jason McCutcheon as president, Jane Beebe vice president, Mary O'Connor secretary, and Mary Salvi treasurer. This is wonderful, they have $33,750 in scholarship funds this year. They're reviewing the scholarships now and looking at 13, I think it was a total of like 13 scholarship programs. That's what I had in my notes. They approved funding of an additional snack pack program for MG Futures program. They are discussing and continuing work on the teachers, staff grant form that they use to apply for grants. They're continuing discussion on their capital campaign and allocation of the proceeds. And they did well on the capital campaign. They worked hard. Jane Beebe is communicating to staff the due dates for grant applications, so they should have that or be getting that information. And the Pay It Forward Committee approved $945 for a foreign language program request. There were no updates from communications, fundraising, that's coming in February. And Kathy Klinke and Abby Eddington would appreciate anyone that would be willing to take time to help volunteer for snack packing, for the snack pack program. And there was no report at this meeting from the scholarship committee or the investment committee, other than the detail that they provided on the funding. So they're doing great.
All right, next is the Student Board Representative Report. Krishna?
Yeah, so good evening. First student report of 2024. That's unbelievable to say. Time really has flown. But to begin, the Monona Grove High School Asian Club, Black Student Union, and Latinos United went to Winnequa School on January 5th to work with the Diversity Club for 3rd to 5th graders. They held informative discussions, games, and Q&As with students. Meanwhile, last week, students from Skills USA competed at regionals at Wisconsin Rapids. The team won 5 gold medals and 1 bronze for their events, and they'll be heading to state in April. Additionally, the French Club recently held its second crepe sale. Proceeds help support Doctors Without Borders, or Médecins Sans Frontières, which is an NGO that operates in regions such as Gaza, Syria, and Ukraine. Furthermore, students going on the trip to France wrote an introductory letter to the host families. They'll be staying in the city of Rennes in northwestern France. It's important to note that the listed events are only a snapshot of the several student-led activities at our high school. Monona Grove students lead and support several communities both within and beyond our high school every single day. And this is only a brief sample of all the incredible things that they can do. With that, thank you for your time, and I look forward to February's student report.
Thank you, Krishna. All right, next are possible action items. First is the 2023-2024 revised extracurricular additive schedule.
Okay, you have a memo attached from Principal Langer with the recommendation to add a paid advisorship position for the middle school ski and snowboard club. And just as a reminder, typically when we have new clubs start, we have teacher volunteers, and then once these clubs are established, they certainly should be compensated for the time for that advisorship, and we'll bring them to the board to add that to the list, and generally look at the compensation as it compares to other similar activities. And so we're looking for approval to add the ski and snowboard club as a paid advisorship for GDS.
Can I have a motion, please?
I move approval of the 2023-2024 revised extracurricular additive schedule as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I would just like to add that in the past, and Janice Stone was a major factor in helping make that happen. But as a parent in the parent group, we took a ski trip, I think it was every week for 6 weeks with the 6th graders. And one of my moving moments was we were sitting on the bus, and one of the young boys was sitting across an upper row from me, and he was sobbing. And I thought, oh, did he get hurt? I was concerned because we check every single kid getting off, every single kid getting on. We check all their equipment, we check everything. And I went up and I said, is there anything I can do to help? And he said, I just want to tell you, it's the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life, and I never would have had an opportunity to do this. So I think it's wonderful that they're trying to work to expand experiences for our students.
Any other comments? All right. Let's move to vote. Rochelle?
Aye.
Susan? Philip?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Eric? Aye. Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. All right, moving on to the 2024-2025 open enrollment recommendations.
Okay, so annually, the board must approve a number of seats for the next school year during the January board meeting. And so there are 3 documents attached. The first one is the document we're asking for approval on tonight that has the recommendation on number of seats per grade level as well as IEP-driven services. And you'll see that we're recommending a total of 45 seats, and with seats at 3 different grade levels. As supplemental documents, there is an enrollment projection document, as well as one that shows a comparison from the last 2 years of by grade level, how many open enrollment versus resident students that we have. So just to be clear, this is a much lower number than we've approved in the past. You might recall we went up by 150 resident students a year ago, and so our class sizes have crept up at some of those grades. And so that's why we're recommending a lower amount this year. Also, it's very difficult to do projections in January, and so we'll certainly monitor that. And there is an opportunity when we come back in June, if the enrollment projections are way off and we do have additional seats, the board can take action at that time to add some additional seats. But we want to be a little bit conservative right now to make sure that we don't, take too many to increase the class size too much. So that's the recommendation for this year.
Dan, just want to get clarity. So are you expecting how much more growth in the classes?
Yeah. So last year, I said we had about 150, residents. So that's a little bit over 10, per grade level. In the projections, I put 8 per grade level for this year. We know that there were 2 different apartment complexes that opened last year that brought a number of students. We still are seeing growth, but probably not quite at the same rate this year. But 8 should be a pretty safe estimate, per that grade level. And as you know, it never comes out exactly even, every grade. But so bottom line is, I would expect this year that resident growth to be somewhere between 50 and 100 students.
Have a motion? I'm just going to do a motion.
For the question?
Yes, and then we can do a discussion. Then we can do a discussion. I just have to put the motion out. Can someone do the motion?
I'd move approval of the, whoops, I'm on the wrong page. The open enrollment recommendations as presented for 2024, 2025. Almost ahead.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? And then you have a question. Yep.
The reason I wanted to discuss it before the motion was because I had 2 questions. So I basically looked at, I was trying to find kind of a number that was, so when you look at the current enrollment, you look at the projected enrollment, and you see that you're projecting, like at Taylor Prairie and 4K, 24 less students than we currently have. That helps you open up a spot. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So when I looked at Cottage Grove grade 1, I saw a decline of 18 from 169 to 151, which was, seemed to be up there. It actually was higher than the kindergarten.
So if you look at the 169 is the current year.
Yes.
The next year, you have to look at the second grade as those students move forward.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
So
You're
that
right.
169, I added 8 for potential growth to 177.
Okay, so that's going to answer my other question too, because I was looking at Winnequa grade 5, which was down by 13.
Yeah.
That one's a little harder to figure because you're looking at the combined 6th grade number. So how would you, if you were looking at 5th grade, either Granite Ridge or Winnequa,
So you look at this year's 4th grade and then moving forward to 5th grade for next year. And then what we projected is 8 new students in our Cottage Grove schools and 4 new students in our Monona schools.
so we're looking at plus.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, that's helpful. Plus, it's nice to have the community know, if they see this document, how to make that calculation. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, Krishna?
Just one quick question. As far as busing is concerned, will these students be unable to take school transportation, or are there, in general, exceptions to that rule?
Our current policy is that students who are not eligible for transportation can still request it, and then, they have to pay for that, transportation. So we do currently have a program that does enable that, and actually we have it up as a discussion item later in this meeting.
Thank you.
All right, we can move to vote. Rochelle?
Aye.
Susan? Philip?
Aye.
Peter?
I'm,
Eric? Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. All right. Moving on to the lease agreement for Maywood School with City of Monona.
Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit in the past. We've been working with the city for over a year now on this agreement. Mark is the one that has done, the primary work, working with the city and our attorneys to get this lease agreement together. So is there any specific questions about the lease? Mark can answer them for you.
just want to introduce it a little bit.
Sure. So, yeah, glad to do that. So as you recall, that for many, several years, we had a lease agreement with Madison School District for their charter school in West Mundo. They moved out prior to this current year. And so for this year, the building's not sitting vacant. We are using a portion of it for our 18 to 21-year-old transition program. And that's going very well, by the way. And then there is still significant space available. And so Monona, particularly with their Park and Rec, they do have a number of after-school programs that currently exist. They also are looking at adding a 4K wrap program, similar to what we have in our Cottage Grove schools. And so it worked out really well as far as what their needs are, our space availability. And so it's just a matter of pulling together the terms of the agreement. And so very pleased to be able to have this, cooperative agreement with the city. I think it's a win-win both for the school district and the city with this agreement.
Peter?
Are we going to continue the transitions programs?
Yes. Yep, so there is a attached map that shows what space the district will continue to use, what space the city has for themselves, and then there's some shared spaces between the two.
All right, we're maintaining the blue space for the transitions program, I guess.
Correct.
How much does it cost to maintain that building a year? Grounds, heats?
I don't know off the top of my head, because this is the first year we'll be tracking it again because Madison paid for most of that.
Right. I believe the last time we did the number, it was close to $100,000. And, and this is a 5-year lease, but it doesn't come close to paying for that. And now we do have our own things going on in there, which helps, justify the cost. But, at the end of this 5-year term, there's this asset that it doesn't cost us a lot to keep, but it's sort of idle and, little utilized, particularly if this program goes away and sitting in the middle of the city. And it's time to start planning for what we do with this property and what's to become of this property.
And the city will be maintaining it from a mowing and landscaping, and then we're covering the plowing
Right.
to make sure it's done in a timely manner.
It's
part of
going to
our
need
contract.
new roofs sooner or later.
It's going to need some things.
Yeah, and boilers and stuff like that. So it's,
Yeah.
we can't keep it forever as a building, so we have to give some thoughts to that.
Yeah, and to your point about, the dollar amount for the lease agreement, and that was a consideration right from the get-go as we talked about this. When Madison leased it, they leased the entire building, so they had access, we had no access to it. In this case,
understand.
yeah, so just so you know where we came with the numbers, we looked at what we currently charge on a per-room basis in our existing buildings and looked at it, kind of from that standpoint.
I don't have any problem with where you end up. I'm just thinking about the long-term financial.
It is a consideration.
It is a
Big consideration.
And it isn't even that annual, it's that the long-term
Exactly.
makeup, like a new roof.
Right, yeah, yeah, yep.
We have to do something with this building before it gets to that point.
My question was along the lines of Peter, just the sustainability piece of it. So we've done a full scope of like the HVAC and roof and so forth of.
We haven't done a complete analysis. We just know based on maintaining it, what
Okay.
needs to be done, but we don't have a dollar figure yet. But that is part of what McKinstry probably will be doing.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
Will they be looking at this building? Because I believe that we've been sort of passing it up on the grounds that
Yeah, yeah, they,
not a long-term
they will
investment.
be, just because we have to have a number in mind in case what we're going to, deciding what we're going to do with it. Yeah.
Sorry.
Susan?
I think another thing that basically Mark and Peter mentioned, basically is that one of the pieces, I mean, we don't know about the growth of MG21. We don't, I mean, you know, Rebecca looks at what she can accommodate and how many students she can reach and how much room she has. So that's always been a piece they looked at. The other thing is, and Dan, were you here when we were doing the wraparound programs? The wraparound programs for 4K with,
In Monona?
well,
We currently are doing
we
it in
did
Cottage
one
Grove.
at Immaculate Heart of Mary, and then we did, I'm trying to think where the other one was. Anyway, we did daycare Kid Safari. We did wraparound programs with the 4K. They actually did the 4K in the basically childcare program. And at that point, they were very successful. And then the administrator who was doing those kind of moved on and moved away from that and didn't sustain those. And I don't know if that's a very positive program and how people look at it now. But again, that's another, with the daycare program in that setting, it's another opportunity for us to bring students in that type of programming in that environment and support the families and the community who need the daycare with the school piece. So again, I think it's great that you're having this conversation, you're exploring those things and putting kids in that building.
Michelle?
I just wanted to say, I think this is a really nice offering to Monona because it does help the kids here in Monona at Winnequa to have an option. So it's, even though it sounds quite affordable at the costs that they're getting it for, I think that it does provide something for our children in our schools as well. So it's kind of a nice collaboration. But I'm in the same camp as Peter, where, you know, it'll be interesting to see how long we can manage to do this before we maybe need to make other decisions. I move approval of the lease agreement between Monona Grove School District and the City of Monona as presented.
Second.
Further discussion? Okay, move to vote. Rochelle?
Aye.
Susan? Philip?
Aye.
Peter? Eric?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried. Moving on to policy revisions, second reading.
Okay, so it's a long list of policies, and it is for the second reading, and again, as a reminder, there is a document attached from Neola that does a short explanation of the rationale, for the policy changes, but I think anyone from the policy committee or myself would be glad to answer any questions on any of the proposed changes.
Philip?
Yeah, I have two questions, or maybe one question and one, I guess, comment, or maybe objection is a better word. First, with the FMLA revision, I was wondering if somebody could.
Policy are you on?
This is policy PO 1630.01, the FMLA. There's three of them actually that I think are the same. I was wondering if somebody could just give me a little bit of background on why we're striking the phrase in the second section about instructional staff members being deemed to meet the 1250 hour requirement, what the rationale behind that would be.
Well, again, the questions are good, and we need to have those questions. Technically, what helps us is if we have those on the first read, so when we come back, we're prepared to answer those in full, because we haven't met for almost a month now, and so it's a little hard to,
And not 100% certain, but this is what I believe is the rationale behind it. The statement before that is essentially right from the law, right, about what the requirement is on the hours. And then that next statement to say all full-time instructional staff are deemed to have met that requirement, that may or may not be true. It depends on how we define full-time. And we do define full-time for different staff in our handbooks. And so I think the idea that in policy, that's not necessarily a given that all instructional staff will have met that. So I believe that's the reason for it.
And I'm not sure I'm answering the question correctly, so you may want to clarify for me, Phil, but basically, that FMLA language was revised to remove a potentially confusing reference to the status of full-time staff eligibility for FMLA based on the 1,250 work hours requirement for federal eligibility. As an FMLA only requires an employee be compensated for $1,000 hours in the previous year. So basically, they were trying to use clarity in the language to remove what may be a potentially confusing reference to the status of full-time staff for eligibility for FMLA.
But what I can tell you is that all these changes such as this are based on recommendations from the attorneys that are specifically, do school law, so.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
When we meet as a legislative committee, we'll actually read their rationale, and then we'll actually go to the actual statute and look at the language of the statute, because occasionally our recommendations are better than the company that we work with, and we send those back, and they make the changes that we recommended. So again, we've got a really great committee, Rochelle and Elizabeth, and I spend often, with this many total hours, it's got to be close to 40, right? I mean, 2 or 3 every time we met, because you've got to look at every single change.
Yeah, no disrespect to the effort
No,
that the committee's put in
we
at all.
want you, it means you looked at it too. You want to be on the committee? No.
So my other one that I wanted to bring up is the replacement policy for the nursing staff members.
Okay, and that's
This
what
would
number?
be, this is going to be number PO 8700 is the proposed new one.
700?
8700?
700.
PO 8700. So it calls out that nursing mothers are guaranteed up to 1 calendar year from the birth of the child to, be protected basically by the policy. And I didn't like that. It feels odd to me that we would dictate to a nursing mother how long she can breastfeed. And I looked at City of Madison, for example. Theirs is at least 2 years. So their language is at least 2 years, not up to 2 years, meaning could be more than 2 years, but at least 2. And for us to say up to 1, meaning no more than 1, just felt inappropriate, I guess. And I wanted to call that out as something that potentially we could change.
Dan, do you have any?
What I'm looking at right now is, interestingly, the next NEO update just came out. So as soon as we get these approved, we'll be starting over again. And that same policy is on the list for revision again.
Okay.
So I was just looking to see if that particular part is going to perhaps change in their next update. And
I realize federal law requires us to offer at least 1 year, but,
so in the next update, in fact, it does provide an option to put in a different timeline. So I think, I don't want to speak for the committee, but I know the committee will look at that very closely. And I think based upon what you said, that I think that's something that, I think you have a couple options. That is our current practice. You could approve as is tonight, knowing that it is going to come back in a couple months, or you could, if you want, choose to, table that particular policy at this time too.
Philip, just out of curiosity, you have an idea timeline that you feel is more appropriate?
I I think using the city of Madison example, the, at least 2 years where it allows for the idea that it could go beyond 2 years. I think something that's less, where we're setting the timeline. Who are we as a district to tell a parent how long they can breastfeed their child? It feels inappropriate to be in our policy, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Certainly longer than a year, I think, if we're going to put a number in there, but
I agree.
Well, I mean, this is an extension of something to, we're stating that you have, that we will make this accommodation for up to a year. We're not limiting it down to a year. We have, we're adding the benefit of making accommodation up to a year. WHO recommends 2 years, by the way, if that's a guideline. And we have to, of course, recall that
I mean, the policy
this isn't
states
without
they're
cost.
only eligible up to 1 year. It's pretty clear. That's what I don't
I
like about
understand,
it.
but
Yeah.
we're not taking away what used to be 10 years or 2 years or 3 years. or
Oh, I get
whatever.
it. I get it.
This is an extension of what we're doing for, it's not a limit. It's a positive, not a negative. We're not limiting.
No, I agree.
not a
If we're going
policy
to have a
that's
policy
limiting.
that states something like this, my preference would be either don't put a time frame in it at all, or
And then it's true. The question is, what's the cost to the district? What is it, the combination? And what I'm thinking about is the education of, are we interrupting, and that could play into this decision as to what's the downside.
Dane County doesn't put a time frame on their policy. Dane County's is we will just provide this as long as it is desired. So I think we should consider something like that. I would certainly, if we have the option to just leave this one for the next meeting or something, I think that'd be fine with me if we can vote everything else through and then just revise if it's that easy to do. I certainly don't want to hold up the entire policy approval just for this one.
I would support that.
But
Just to remind, and talked about it again, Peter has helped us do this before. Technically, by policy, right, Dan? We're supposed to receive written notification for any concern so that we can be ready to table it, because we'd be happy to take it back to policy.
Well-
We want to do that. Technically,
So here's the way I understand our policy on that. So to make a revision, you have to have the 2 readings. So if tonight, for instance, tonight you couldn't make a motion, say, I move to revise this policy to change it to 2 years, you would have to bring that back a second time, at the next meeting. There's also something in our policy that Susan referenced that says that must be given to their board members in writing before we do that. So I think so you can't revise it tonight, but can you choose not to approve that one tonight? Sure. And I think it'd be a simple motion, simply, I move to approve all policies as presented except for, policy 8700, something like that.
except, let me just clarify with you to make sure. If we don't approve 8700, then what policy do we currently have in place relating to nursing mothers? I don't want us to end up with nothing.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
I mean, currently, our current policy says we follow the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is 1 year. So this policy is not different from what we do now. This current policy is essentially what we do now. It just states it explicitly rather than just referencing FLSA. So it doesn't actually change anything if we implement this policy effectively, other than the wording. So either way.
So, Peter, what are your thoughts about just procedurally? I think we have 2 choices. One is,
So if we don't do anything tonight, if we don't take up this new policy tonight, nothing changes until we
okay,
take it out.
as long as we have something
Do
in
in
place.
3 weeks or
We can do it at any time.
And if you would just put your concern in writing so that, and we'll make sure we meet, and when we meet, we'll make sure this policy is discussed so that we clearly understand your concern and that we don't misinterpret it in any way.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to put it in writing.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Is that,
Yeah, I think we probably have it, but just a quick email to me would be sufficient.
yeah, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a big deal, because Dan will make sure that we have it, and we'll have that discussion. And again, when we see something that's even mildly controversial, we try and bring that whole policy to the board, because we don't want to just leave it at the committee level. So again, if there are concerns, either with the policy or with the revision, we want to take it back and talk about it and make sure we understand exactly what you want us to look at.
Thank you, Susan. Eric?
I have a concern about, questions and concerns about policy 1421, criminal history record check and employee self-reporting requirements. The old policy referenced that staff or employees would have to report major traffic offenses referenced as operating under influence, revocation of suspension of a license, driving after revocation of the suspension, violation reported employee drives, if they drive for the district. And the change says that now all employees have to report offenses such as operating under the influence of an intoxicant or other drug, reckless driving, operating after suspension, revocation, failure to report an accident, or refusal to take a breath test. I think that's taking a step too far for someone that is not driving for the district. To me, that seems like that's, the one specifically that really concerns me is the drug one, because it doesn't specify what drugs. And if you have an employee that's driving outside of work on a Friday or Saturday or whenever, and they get pulled over for some drug offense, and we don't know what it is, now that employee has to report that immediately. I don't like that. I think it oversteps. I agree that if they're driving for the district in any capacity, they absolutely have to do that, but not if they have no obligation to drive for the district.
I would ask if HR has an opinion on that.
That wouldn't be something that I would want to be stepping into, unless there's a real nexus to somebody's job. I would have a really hard time reaching into people's lives outside of.
And that, my concern is the way the policy is written is an employee could be terminated if that happened, the way that the changes were made. So I'm a bit concerned about that. I mean, I wouldn't vote for this change as it's written.
Not to put you in the spot, but do you have any rationale for why the change was made?
Basically, what they were telling us in this particular was that they were adding self-reporting requirement language in these policies has been revised for greater clarity, and again, recommended but not required.
So, yeah, just like the other one, that is our current policy. The only change is to provide clarity about what type of traffic offenses, meet that standard.
I don't think so, Dan. I think it's clearly referencing all employees that are not, as far as I understand, I may be reading it
With
incorrectly.
your way you read it, yeah.
The change is a significant change from employees who are driving for the district, and the change is for all employees. So even if we have an employee who does not drive or is not responsible for driving in any capacity for the district, as an example, if they got pulled over for the influence of some drug, doesn't say what, any drug, they would have to report that immediately to the district or possibly face disciplinary action or termination.
The same policy. That
Yeah,
hasn't changed. That's already in that policy.
This one?
no, it's not.
I don't think it is.
May I?
Right underneath the subsection, it says employee self-reporting requirement. The first paragraph says all district employees shall notify the superintendent as soon as possible and
You
so
mean
on.
up here?
Yeah, that's already in the policy.
Then why is it written in green? Why is it added then? On the bottom?
The bottom part is the clarification about what types of things must be reported.
May I? If you read the pink strike-through language, it says, operating under the influence, revocation, expensive license, et cetera, or moving violation must be reported if the employee drives or operates a district vehicle or piece of mobile equipment that transfers. Okay, so those things are only reported if they drive.
Those two specific offenses.
Well, there's an offense of operating under the influence, revocation or suspension of license, and driving after revocation or suspension. Or any, this is unclear language, or any moving violation must be reported if the employee drives or operates a district vehicle. And then the new language says you have to report those regardless of whether or not you, at least as I read it, drive.
That's how I understand it.
Right.
I don't know.
So you have to report those regardless of whether or not you drive, and the old language was only if you drive. So it's not really, it is a bit of a change.
So what I would recommend on this, if you choose not to adopt this tonight, when we refer it back to the policy committee, we definitely should consult with legal counsel before making any changes on
Yeah,
that.
I was just looking at the statute too, and the statute is just a reference tool. It's not the legal language provided in here. So again, I think when we looked at it, we, just as Peter was doing, we were trying to make sure that effectively, with clarity, these two things said the same thing. They were just trying to add more clarity. And if you're seeing that it looks different to you, then we should look at it again.
Yeah, it does, Susan. It just looks, it seems to me, the way I'm reading it, that it could be interpreted as any employee. So,
Right.
We don't want to do that. We don't want to leave it open. We want it to be, because of the language and how it affects people, we want that to be clear. And again, we'll take it back to the committee and they'll look at it. If you would just, again, email Dan, kind of, and I can go back and watch the meeting and re-listen to your concern as well, just like Phil, so. But if you would just put that in an email to Dan, we'll make sure that's on the list to relook at. So, were there any other, yeah,
I would just comment that the old language needs an Oxford comma. If it had one, it wouldn't be ambiguous, but it doesn't. So there's an or there, and we don't know if it's everything, or-
Yes.
Yeah, the language is a little
well,
unclear.
and again, I really appreciate this input because occasionally, we look at something and the new Neola language is not as good as the old. And often in certain situations, we don't accept it or it isn't straight reading of the statute. And again, we really look at it. I think when we looked at this, it looked like it was effectively a restatement of what was already there, supposed to be adding clarity. And where it says, if it says recommended, but not required, that means they're just adding clarity. So we'll go back and relook at that.
okay, thanks.
Do we have the two written down that we're going to hold?
Actually, the one that, Eric's referenced, there's actually three policies that all are the same: 1421, 3121, and 4121.
I think with mine, we need to not strike one as well, right? It's not just hold out. We need to not strike the existing one and then, and not,
Not rescind the other.
yeah, or not submit the new one.
I would submit that PO 8700 is actually an expansion of accommodations over PO 443005, and which is the nursing staff members. So I think that if we wanted, the best thing for people would be to adopt those ones tonight and then make a change. If we want to extend the time, make a change in the future, but then we get all the other language without a change of the timing, and then in the future we can expand that term. It's another policy change, but I would recommend that we make the first change tonight and then we expand it in the future. that's just my thought about the best way to work that. But we do, if we want to really make that, we have to pay attention and do it.
I had the same thought about that, but, again, trying to accommodate a concern.
How do we guarantee that we do that?
That's the question.
Well,
Well, I can guarantee this policy will be coming for the board again, because in the next update. Or, I take it back. I can guarantee it will come to the committee.
And we can bring it to the board.
yeah, we'll guarantee that will come to the board.
Just so you know the timing of this, the next update's out. I'm scheduled to meet with our Neola rep, I believe, the second week of February. My goal is to bring the committee together by the beginning of March, that the first reading were to come in our March meeting. So we're looking at, 2 months or a month and a half from
So
now.
it would be.
I would rather that we just
Yeah, I don't want to, I'm
change
not,
done now.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we got a board meeting in like 3 weeks. Can't we just revise it and vote then? I mean, I agree. I know what you're saying, Peter, but
Yeah,
we're talking about
I'm just throwing
yeah.
that out.
Yeah, no, our current policy doesn't have a number in it. So I like our current policy better in that way, that it doesn't have
Oh,
a
it
number.
does. Current policy references indirectly. It says FLSA. Family
Right.
leaves, and
FLSA
then
guarantees at
FLSA.
least a year. It doesn't say you can stop, you have to stop at a year, right? So that's good, right? It says we're going to, because we can't do anything else. That's federal law. This one says up to a year, right? It constricts it to a year. That's what I don't care for
Okay.
about it, right?
All right, I got
City
you.
of Madison says at least 2 years, could be more, right?
Gotcha.
We say up to,
right.
and then your eligibility is gone, and I don't think that's appropriate. So, yeah, I would much prefer that we just clean it up and vote on it next board meeting. Yeah.
Just to be clear, it'll take you 2 meetings to do it.
Sorry, yeah.
Next one would be the
Yeah.
first reading.
Because-
New,
Well, we can count
Right
this
in.
as the first reading.
no, you can't, it's not in writing tonight.
Okay.
The first reading has to be in writing.
So March is when we'd do it. Yeah.
But you're also in March going to get the next update for the same policy.
Hopefully, yeah.
I would suggest just hold off and do it all at once.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You can take the input from the new guidelines too. But
And just so you know, one of the options provided in the new update is the option of providing the minimum required, or minimum required by law. So that might get to the same place, or you can put in your actual timeline.
I sent you an email with,
I did too. To you two both, so.
So our thought about approving the other, do we want to not approve these two at this time? Do we want to pull those? Is it 2 or 3?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing is there's concern about the group of 3, 1421, 3121, 4121. Those are essentially the same. And then the other are as a pair, 4430.05 and 8700. And so that, I think the cleanest would be
Strike those.
to, approve all except and then list those 5. Instead of trying to list all the other ones.
I would move approval. Let's see, whoops, I've lost it. Run over the policy adoption revisions and deletions as presented, accepting PO 1421, 3121, 4121, 4430.05, and 8700.
I'll second that.
Further discussion? Okay, let's move to vote. Rochelle?
Aye.
Susan? Philip?
aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Lorraine? Aye. Ayes have it. Motion is carried.
And thank you guys again, I really appreciate this input. We keep hoping there's a better way to do this. Again, if we could do it on first read, it'd be great, because then we'll take it back and we'll totally review it, and we can actually bring it back and present that policy, the original and the change, as a piece of a presentation. to the
Yeah,
board.
I actually would characterize this as it working really well, right? I mean, you brought dozens and dozens of policies and nearly all of them just got approved. So I think it actually is working great.
And Susan, sometimes I miss it
Oh.
I miss it. So like, this one, I just had a little extra time and I caught it, but like, I just didn't catch it last time,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
So it's not that I didn't try to give you the information ahead of time, it's just that I miss things, so.
Well, and again, it is so helpful when you take the time and the energy. I mean, just doing it on those couple, you can get a feel for what this is like. When Dan brings us in a list like this, it is like fall over. And we take about 10 at each meeting, and we'll have like 5 meetings, you know. Again,
This was an exceptionally long update. The next one is much, much shorter. It is, yeah.
No, and I appreciate Susan and the policy committee, the work that you put into it.
Again-
It doesn't go unnoticed. It might seem like it does, but it certainly doesn't.
Yeah, this committee is really great because we all have a little different expertise. And I do look up all the statutes to make
I
sure.
know you do. That's why I think you're great.
That's why we send
as
it
a chair.
back to Neola. Yeah, I'm not sure it's exactly right.
All right, moving on to discussion items.
Yes, very, very much.
Student transportation services.
Okay, so we asked to put this as discussion tonight to just update the board on what our current practices are with transportation, bring forth some challenges that we have with the current, policy and practices, get some feedback, and then perhaps if we are going to be looking at changes based upon your feedback, come back at a later meeting for perhaps a policy change with this. So there's obviously written summaries here. I'll just try to, do a brief oral summary about where we're at. So back in 2013 was the last time that the board had a policy change. At that time, for our students in the lower elementary, the distance in which students were eligible for transportation were any families that lived more than 3/4 of a mile away from the school. State law is 2 miles regardless of grade level. Most districts have a policy for shorter than 2 miles for, various grade levels. Usually it's shorter for the younger, children, and then as you go up. My understanding is that that policy change at that time was based upon budget constraints, that the board was, the district had some budget challenges and therefore needed to cut transportation costs and therefore made it students eligible at 2 miles for all grade levels. Clearly, to ask a kindergartner to walk 2 miles to school is not reasonable. So I think the trade-off was that there is in the policy that parents can still request transportation, but they have to pay for it. And so we refer to it as the buy a bus seat program. And so district has been doing that for many years. As our current staff now that is in charge of doing that realize, first of all, there are a number of challenges in trying to manage that. Because parents who are eligible for transportation put in their requests in the summer, and we really work hard to try to get those in so we can get buses routed. And then, the policy is, well, if there's space, well, of course, we want to accommodate everyone. So between Nelson's and our staff, they're working really hard right up till the first day of school, adjusting bus routes and getting people routed. And then many have to, occur after the school year started. So just managing that is difficult, but I think more importantly, in a fairness level, we really should be transporting children that are closer than that. Now, the board also visited this. The other option or the other part of the law is if a family lives in an area that's deemed unusually hazardous, then they're also eligible. And the statutes are not real clear on what that means. It used to be that if a family lived in somewhere they felt it was not safe for their children to walk, they could ask the district to, look at that or appeal. And it used to be you'd go to the Dane County Sheriff's Department and they would make a determination whether that was a hazardous area or not. They no longer do that. It's up to the district to make that determination. So we did a couple of years ago hire an outside consultant to look at our maps and make some determinations about traffic rates and whether there's sidewalks or not and how busy the roads were. And so we currently have these maps that determine what areas are considered unusually hazardous. So we do transport a lot of kids under that 2 mile radius that are in those hazardous areas. We're not proposing that we make changes to those maps at this time. We would like the board, though, to consider the change to policy and in addition, looking at certain distances and expand who is eligible for transportation. And so Mark has a memo on there with some numbers about how many students that we currently transport who are not eligible that are in the buy a bus seat. And both for residents as well as open enrolled students. So open enrollment students are not eligible for transportation by statute, but our policy is if a family can get the student to a current bus route within the district and there's space, then they can have that transportation from that point on. But again, they have to pay for that transportation. And so that's something that we do. Not all districts allow that. Some districts simply, no, there's no transportation for open enrolled. So Mark, anything to add to that? That's kind of the big picture.
Peter?
Transportation funding is calculated separately, right? It's not Fund 10,
No, it
isn't it? It is just Fund 10? Okay, and there's no separate contribution
Well,
to the.
special ed is part of the special ed formula.
Uh-huh.
So we get whatever the special ed rate is, it's 31.5% this year. So our if a special ed student rides a regular bus, no, we don't get funding. We just get transportation. But if we have specific special ed transportation costs, we get reimbursed at 31.5%.
Thank you. I'm looking at it, the policy as written requires us to transport over 2 miles. It doesn't say anything about anybody underneath. It shall over 2 miles. It
Yeah.
doesn't say we can't for less than that. We did move this up. I'm not even sure we need a policy change to do. I don't think
Incorporate
we don't need a policy
Yeah.
change to incorporate people within the 2 miles. So, you guys should just figure out what we need to do for transportation, and then if we need a policy change, or make sure that it's right. But you don't need us to do this first before you start moving in that direction, I guess. And I just want to make sure that the policy in the end ends up aligns with what we end up doing. And it might be better to wait to hold off any policy changes until you figure out exactly what it is you want to do.
You're exactly right. And in fact, we don't make many exceptions right now, but we have made some, I should say exceptions. You stated exactly right. For instance, one of the new apartments that went up in Cottage Grove is 1.9 miles from the middle school. We made a decision that we're transporting those children. It was the right thing to do, and but we have a lot of others, besides that. So that's a good point. We could do that, and that's part of the discussion tonight of what, would the board like to see. Obviously, there's some budget implications, so we'd have to be reasonable about how far we can go, but.
Yes, and I would support lowering that number from 2 miles to, 3/4 of a mile, I think is
And part of the policy too is so we have something to support us when a parent says, oh, well,
Why are
I'm
you doing it?
1.6 and my kid is a 10th grader. Well,
Yeah.
we think your kid can walk 1.6 as opposed to a kindergartner who can't. So we need that support as well.
Sure.
Or maybe it's an administrative guideline. I don't know how you do it, but it'd be better for us to manage if it was an actual policy.
Eric?
Well, I wonder if I can get some clarification, because this is a little confusing to me how it's written. And I'm referencing the Board Policy 751 link, Student Transportation Services. It says transportation, looking down where it says kindergarten through grade 4, it says transportation shall be provided for all grade kindergarten through 4 students who live more than 3/4 of a mile, striking that and putting in 2 miles or more. So you're increasing, you're actually adding what it should have been before?
I'm sorry, that is a policy that was adopted in 2013.
More than 3/4 of a mile.
No, they changed it to 2 miles at that time.
Oh, this is the policy from that.
This is the
This isn't
revision.
a change, it's not a revision or change.
Correct.
This is how the policy is right now.
Yeah,
Got it, okay.
And you
So
can
the
see the
actual-
change we made.
yeah. So
Well,
the actual policy is in the above link.
Okay, all right. I just want, that's why I just
600,
just
yeah.
wanted to clarify,
Yeah.
because you were saying we're going to increase, and this looks like you're going back. Got
Yeah,
it.
I was trying to look at historically, when did this change, and I found this
Okay.
document.
And it
that
was, or it
approved.
had the strike through there,
Yeah.
it wasn't just,
So
okay.
that's the document
Okay.
that was approved in 2013.
Got it, all right.
Krishna?
Yeah. I'll begin with some facts from the school report card. At least for high school, about 19.1%, roughly 1 in 5 students, are economically disadvantaged. Furthermore, out of the 1,083 enrolled in our district, 16.7%, including myself among them, are open enrolled. Our overall score as a district is about 67.9, rated as meets expectations. This policy extends equity and opportunity to students who live in our district by expanding accessibility to public transportation. Of course, there isn't a perfect solution to the growth challenges we currently face as a district. However, it has always been and will always continue to be my wholehearted belief that accessibility to public transportation provides a plethora of benefits available to our current and future student populations. Because of that, public transportation nationwide saves the United States 6 billion gallons of gasoline annually. On average, every dollar invested in public transportation yields roughly $4 to $5 in return. Furthermore, buses are the safest mode of transportation, almost 10 times as safe as cars. Because of this, there's also much of an impetus in regards to sustainability, as our school district in the past few years has taken a stance towards accepting sustainability, both due to its financial and environmental implications. I believe that increasing the public transportation offered by our school district will continue to yield similar results to the projects we have already taken upon in our district. Because of that, I'd be very interested in any data possible to see how our current and such a policy suggestions would have an impact on our emissions and carbon footprint. Overall, I wholeheartedly support any measure that will increase the accessibility and equitability of public transportation in our district. And I truly believe that any such measure would have a significant return in our student population. And because of that, I actually did have 2 questions I want to address to the board. In regards to the Inflation Reduction Act, I was wondering if there's any recent federal or state funding programs that we know of that would allow us to enhance this policy or support it at the very least. And in addition, within the next decade, are there any plans to convert our fleet or Nelson's in general to electric buses?
Peter?
You know, one of the things I did at the school board convention is I always talk to the Nelsons because they're there with the latest and greatest and stuff. And I did talk about electric buses, and right now they're $450,000. And there is IRA funds, but it's targeted at rural districts, which, if you ask me, is a problem because the dense urban districts actually are the ones who can make the most most efficient use of that technology, and it works less well in the state of the technology right now. It works less well in rural areas. But yeah, it was an interesting discussion that was had about that, and there is this future, but in my opinion, after some of the discussions, we're not quite there yet. But yeah, it is something to look at, and it is coming.
To follow up on Peter's, not only the expense of $450,000, and a lot of the grants that these things are tied to are based on free and reduced. And so the rural areas would possibly have a better percentage. So that drives where the allocations go. The other thing is, and based on brief discussions with Nelson's, there's just not a lot of people that know how to fix these things at this point. It's a very specialized mechanical operation, and so the infrastructure to fix it and to have people that are knowledgeable to repair is very limited as well.
And do you believe that would change within the coming decade to a point?
No idea.
Rochelle?
I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but how are we doing with people who want to buy a bus seat as to room in the buses? Because I know some of those routes get pretty full. Have we been able to accommodate all those folks, or have we had to tell some people we can't accommodate?
Even though our policy says, only if we have room, we have accommodated everyone. We've never turned anyone away. Yeah.
I have a question. I saw your hand, but just affordability, have we had issues with families that aren't able to afford to buy a
And we
seat?
do waive the fees for those families that have financial need. Yeah.
Philip?
This is probably way too premature, but I was going to ask the upcoming switch with the Cottage Grove schools to neighborhood schools. Does this play into that in any way?
It does. That's kind of what kind of drove the conversation and why to bring it forth now. Started with the challenges of managing the buy a bus seat, and then all of a sudden, as we looked at this, kind of the issue we talked about it's just too far. But then also, as we started that planning as well, realizing we're gonna have some different transportation zones for those schools. So that's kind of tied to this as well. On the positive note, the busing should be a little more efficient in those, but you're right, we are gonna have to change the zones for those schools at that time as well, and now is a good time to look at that all together.
Are you going to have I'm sorry, Susan?
I just want to comment that I was opposed to this change when we made it. It came from business services, and again, it was financial, and they finally built in the option to be able to buy a seat. But I'll tell you, I went out and walked the walk distances in good weather, not weather like today. And I thought, if this were my 5 or 6-year-old kid, and again, I don't feel safe. And I can tell you you have to admit that Cottage Grove Road, basically between bus and, going into the Cottage Grove, if you come out of Vilas and try and turn left, so what I was told at the time when we approved this was, oh, those kids only live this distance to a light. So they're gonna walk on Cottage Grove Road in the snow. It's barely shoveled on the side of the road. There's no sidewalk, and cross at the light to go to Glacier Dome. Anyway, I didn't like this back then. I didn't like the bus routes. I wasn't comfortable with it. And so having you reevaluate this, I think is great. And it brings a safety piece to our children. And again, I think we should reevaluate this, especially if we feel we have the funding to accommodate these students. What we did before, remember, weren't you here, Dan? They went through every single route, they showed us everything, they showed us where they were gonna cross, go walk it. And see how safe you feel at that time of day making that cross.
Michelle?
Maybe something to add off of what you're saying too, with Monona putting in sidewalks. This may be something that needs to be reevaluated more frequently, because I think our communities are trying to make the cities more walkable and safer for our kids to do that.
And you wanna know how many years it took to put in
Oh, I know.
the sidewalk on McKenna? And then on Winnequa. Oh, so it ends at the bottom of the hill. And you've got a mom with a stroller on this side and 2 bikers on this side who insist on biking as a pair. And there's snow on the side, there's no room for 2 cars. Speed bumps or not. And again, I saw a car, they passed us on Winnequa Road and hit the speed bump going 45 miles an hour. I thought, good for you. No, again, it's something I think we need to look at in terms of safety every year. We've got to get these kids to school.
So do have one other thing that I'd like feedback from board members on. So for instance, as we look at like our youngest children, like K2, the old policy was 3/4 of a mile. We think it should even be less than that, like a half mile. So our question is, say we are able to change it, so we are able to provide transportation, to anyone with, half mile or longer. Would you still see a need to offer the buy a bus seat for children like less than a half mile?
I don't.
Do we have anybody that takes advantage of that?
Well, we'd have to go and track it and see where those folks are right now that are utilizing that. I would guess that very few are in that very short distance, but I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to look at that. But that was kind of our thought, is if we have reasonable distances, we really shouldn't have to offer the buy a bus seat.
Yes, my question, Dan, would be, does the prohibition against buying a bus seat, is there an exception for any sort of hazardous route? So if you're less than a half mile from the school, but you have to cross,
Exactly, then you are eligible.
then you're still, okay, so that's still included.
Susan?
I feel you really need to be able to offer that, because we aren't, when the sheriff used to come out and do the evaluation, when the deputy sheriffs did, they sat there and they counted and they looked at what was going on and they made a really good assessment. Now we make that assessment. And the day you go out, may not really show you what's going on that road. And if a parent feels that walk is unsafe, so for instance, the kids on Birchhaven Circle, if they walk that whole circle, there's no sidewalk in there. They walk that whole circle, they can either come out at the top of the hill where there's a stop sign or cut through, and there's no stop sign, nothing that stops the traffic on Winnequa Road. Again, look at Vilas. You're gonna have a kid cross Vilas Road, oh, they're a middle schooler. Again, I want that child to be able to come safely and their parents to feel they're safe as they're getting to the district. So if we can, I would like to continue to offer that seat to the families that feel they need that.
And I guess I can't speak to that as far as why parents currently choose to buy a bus seat. I'm sure that's the case for some, and others, it might be they just believe it's too far long of a walk. So that's why I'm thinking if we shorten the distance, that will eliminate, the need for
They
most.
reduce
But I
it.
don't know how much.
If they reduce it, we don't know that it will eliminate it.
Yeah. Okay. And then one final piece related to that, any thoughts about, for open enrolled students? So currently, we can't go into the neighboring district to pick up children. So so really, generally, we do have some students that live real close to the border that can actually walk there. Sometimes parents actually do drive their children into the district to a pickup, and then they get on there. So any difference of opinion or criteria for open enrolled students?
Great if we can offer them transportation. That's a huge help to families if we have room.
Accepted them as open enrolled students, they're students in my mind, so.
I agree with my board members. Krishna?
Yeah, although I am a senior, that policy would have absolutely had a massive impact on me had it come a few years earlier. And I take it that under such a method, there wouldn't be a demand for them to pay a fee for that?
So yeah, there is a fee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they'd still have to.
That's the current policy.
Okay, but if we were
It's
to
eligibility,
revise it.
but you have to pay a fee for the bus transportation.
Yeah, and if we were to revise that,
It'd be that the revision would be there's no transportation.
Okay, thanks, that was my question.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more quick question? How much is it to buy a seat?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that because, Mark, since he's been here, have tried to figure out what the formula is, and it's not clear. Go ahead and take that one.
If you're open enrollment, it's $425 or $450, and then if you're a resident, it's about half.
That was another question we had is why, should we be charging the actual cost, whether you're a resident or not? And it seems to me that we should. Given that we do waive for, financial need, but for the folks that have the ability to pay, shouldn't we be charging the actual cost? We're not right now.
What is the actual cost?
Well, we pay parent contracts to people that take their kids to private school. And that, I think this past year was about 700. Because it's based on our.
Per student?
Yeah, it's based on our prior year costs.
That's our actual cost. And currently, what do we charge for buying a bus seat?
Open enrollment's $425, $450, and yeah.
Below our actual cost? We
No,
charge,
it's $300 below our actual cost.
Yeah, okay.
And then it's about half for resident.
Okay. I think feedback's helpful. We'll, bring forth, we'll certainly update you on other plans. Mark, anything else that?
No, we covered it all.
Okay.
Just clarity, so are you then creating a policy that,
Yeah, I think when we come with our recommendations, we'll certainly share with the board, and then we can determine whether we actually want a policy change, or as Peter suggested, it's just more of an administrative, rule. Interestingly, back to the Neola templates, we are not using the Neola policy on this. That language that was adopted in 2013, we incorporated into our policy. The Neola template does exactly as Peter said. It doesn't have distances. It simply says we'll follow the law in providing transportation and leaves it up to administration to, set up those, eligibilities. So I think that'd be a good discussion perhaps at the policy committee level. So, and, obviously the full board eventually.
All right, moving on to the superintendent search process and timeline. Peter, I know that you wanted to kind of.
Yeah, I wanted this on the agenda. I asked that this be put on the agenda because we did have a meeting last week, but a couple of board members couldn't be there. And plus, I think that this is an important thing that should be discussed in a place where there's good public access. And we had a special meeting, it was open to public and so on, but it was, not televised and so on. So I think just having a chance for people to ask questions and have any discussion we want to have, and also that review the timeline would be a useful thing to do.
I do want to just jump in with the job posting, since that is something that's very imperative. So it was on Board Docs. Were there any changes that were noted? Because we would like to send that on to Mike right away. So,
Post it tomorrow.
correct, so,
I reviewed it and I didn't have any, I thought it was fine, so.
Okay.
I didn't send any changes.
I thought it was good.
And then, in that, there is a timeline. When we met last week, we did manage to squeeze some time out of the timeline. We do want to do this sort of as quickly as reasonable possible because I think that helps get good candidates. But the other thing we did at the end, we have an election coming up and we will have new board members, at least one. And so we did jigger the schedule so that the final interviews will be after the election, although it's before the new board is seated. But we can then work with anybody who's elected to gather help give them some say and, some thought, let them pay attention in the process as we see fit.
But as this timeline is outlined now, this board will
Right.
be responsible for hiring
That's right.
the superintendent, but may not be, some of us may not be here after it's announced.
Well, it depends on what you do. So the new board starts on April 19th. Is that what I heard?
Whenever the reorganization is, which is
Reorganization,
after
April.
the April meeting.
Yeah, so the hiring and approval and so on would, in my mind, should be done by this board, these people,
Yeah, I
because
agree.
we've all worked on this together. However, I think just to be fair to a new member, having it so that they can give us some input, so that they feel that, if they feel that input, they have more buy-in in the decision, which I think is going to help with the relationships going forward. That's important.
Eric?
Does that also include approving the contract, or could that potentially fall after the board? Because sometimes it takes a little while to
So
negotiate
if there's
that.
any change in board members, the new board members take their seat on April 22nd. So I think on this timeline you proposed, that would occur before the 22nd.
Okay,
We have plenty of time to do it. We don't have to, but we have plenty of time to do it at this time.
okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
If we
I
really-
don't know if it's plenty of time, it's enough time, I think,
It's
and I
enough time.
appreciate that you guys moved the timeline up, so, for this board.
Rochelle, I just want to make sure that you're up to speed. Did you have any questions at all, or are you fine with the process?
I feel good about it,
Okay.
yeah.
I want to throw something out there. I had some discussions at the convention with superintendents, with Tanya, in particular about, this process. And, I can't help notice when you walk around at the convention at all of the superintendents who are tall white men, and I think there's, for whatever reason, you end up that way. And I think we end up, not on purpose, but I think school boards end up ignoring opportunities of talented people because we have this, because of a lot of reasons. And, one of the things I've seen places do when they do hiring processes is at the initial cut, they remove all identifying gender and race and identifying information from the search results, from the candidate search results. What difference does it make what their name is? What difference does it make if you can identify their race or their gender from their stereotypical name? When you're considering a candidate, I'm wondering if we can ask HYA to do that when they present the slate of candidates to us on the March 13th. I would wonder how people would feel about that.
So you want
You get a resume. You get a resume
without a name?
without a name, essentially.
Discuss anything, you're not voting.
And the reasoning behind that is?
It helps you make a decision that's not biased. It removes an opportunity for unconscious bias.
Peter, we do something pretty similar at my company. Yeah.
I mean, is there support for asking HYA to do that? Eric's confused.
No, I'm not confused. I think you can have bias, right? And you can understand that you have bias, and I think that we're all smart enough to realize that. But when you're looking for the best candidate, to me personally, I don't think that would interfere with me, choosing a candidate. I guess I really don't care one way or the other. I don't know. I think it's fine if their name is there. It's fine with me if they're not. It doesn't really matter to me. But I guess I just don't see the purpose of doing it, so, especially in this case.
There's this phenomenon you see over and over again. There's lots and lots of research of this where you have, they do these studies and they switch the names up. And people who will say up and down, I'm not biased, I'm not, they will make selections that come down to the perceived.
Yeah, I told you I was biased, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recognize that.
So, and I am saying it, maybe it doesn't make a difference, but it does help give sort of validity to a process that we're trying to be more open-minded, be open to diversity, be unbiased. Maybe it doesn't make a difference, but it would indicate that we're trying.
I'm curious what the other board members think.
Yeah.
I'd be open to it. I mean, I think I agree with you with our own innate biases that we may say we're biased, but we're not always aware as how much that controls our decisions. But I also think that removing someone's name does not make it an even playing field, because I think a lot of people maybe haven't had the same opportunities, but it doesn't mean that they're less quality or would be less qualified, because I think it's easy to say, well, this person went to this school and has all this prestigious opportunity, because I feel like we're going to see the same tall white men if that's what we are looking at. I think we need to, in a perfect world, that would be a great way to do it. I just think it's more complicated than just removing somebody's name to.
I mean,
Can we not?
You're absolutely right.
It bothers me when we reference anybody. So honestly, I don't like referencing any person, any race, any gender. So do we have to reference like that? Because I've heard tall white men, I've heard white men at least 4 times.
Oh, it's just an observation
I was just
made.
responding what Peter was saying.
It's just an observation I made.
Yeah, I mean, we should hire the best candidate, period. And it would be a disservice to any candidate that we hire, especially our diverse candidate pool, if we don't have a mission to hire the best candidate. And that's all I want to do. So I mean, however we decide to do it, I have faith that the board's going to do that. So, because I think we have a good board and good people here. So I have total 100% faith that we're going to hire a great candidate. I'm not remotely worried about that at all.
I mean, can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
Go ahead if you had something.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so one of the things that, to your point about, the name, the reason why the name is important or could be important is because it's what you use to look them up, right? And so if you can't look them up, I think that's sometimes key to what Peter's driving at, right? Because as soon as you get a LinkedIn profile, you get a picture, you get a bunch of extra information about the person. And there's definitely been a trend in hiring practices, at least that I've been exposed to, of trying to eliminate that, right? And so getting more of a candidate profile, candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, that's drummed down to as much of what you're really trying to compare, right? And then, usually at least in my space, you don't really know much more about them until you have decided that they're worth an interview or they're worth meeting. And, inevitably you're going to meet them, right? But trying to put that off as far as you can so that you don't lose people early in the process to unconscious bias is the idea.
I think I would like to hear more from Mike about that. I also want to know from the candidates themselves how they would feel about that. So I think I need more information before I can, say either way. Krishna?
Yeah, thanks. In regards to blind recruitment, of course, the trouble with unconscious bias that it is by definition unconscious. Of course, I have total faith in this board to fulfill their hiring processes. Yet, I also think that in regards to this change, even if we do not make it in this round and it merely stays as a rule for processes down the road, I think that we should in any way find where we can address unconscious bias and make sure that it is mitigated. But at the same time, I also feel as though that simply doing this out of a sense of encouraging something that might not necessarily be there, i.e., hiring based on quality when there might be structural implications to who has access to improve upon their quality years before they ever apply for a job here, is a subject matter that is far more complicated and would require much more debate. In that regard, however, I also believe that this would certainly place a lot more value on an interview, which of course I would support in any sense of the matter. So I just simply wanted to say that, of course, with bias, that is a very difficult and challenging discussion to address, simply because of the fact that most of it is unconscious, and that as we move forward to a hiring process that is updated in those standards, that we ensure the best possible result in terms of quality first.
Susan?
So again, I think this is a very thoughtful discussion. I tend to agree that it's helpful to have a name because it may be a name you know, or you've heard of, or you've had an experience with, or someone else has had an experience with. It kind of changes the connection. The other thing is, if you've worked in healthcare, the names, the background, the race, the piece, if you're in there and you're ill, that's not what you're looking at. What you're looking at is quality health care for you who's deathly ill. And I really believe that our board feels that way about this candidate. We're looking for the person that's best. The name is just something that my mom and dad gave to me when I was born and I've lived with. I don't like my middle name very well, but it's just something that you live with and you build your own respect for that. Being a woman, you think we aren't looked at differently than a man?
That, of course, is the point of my suggestion. That's exactly the point of my
But
suggestion.
I use, my name is part of my identity and I've lived with that and I've integrated that into my being. And I want you to be able to communicate with me as a person that way. Again, apply to law school. In the year I applied to law school, there were 14 women in a law school of 150. I mean, yeah. So my name was Susan. Did that make a difference? I don't know. But hopefully it was what I was interested in, what I wanted to do, what my qualifications were, what I brought to that program that made the difference. I'm hoping that we are going to be moving in that direction. and have that kind of respect for each other in the work that we do.
I think we can definitely bring this forth to Mike, and because maybe he has a different lens than what we're bringing up here, so.
Absolutely. Like I said, I don't see a downside, and I think,
Same.
it's,
I don't
it's
see
a
a
thing
harm.
for moving forward in this process. It's, it's not a magic bullet or anything, but it's just one little step, and I think it's an indication that we could give the candidates and the community that we're, trying things, and we're trying to move in the right direction, so.
Eric and then Rochelle.
I see a downside. What if we use unconscious bias, it's potential we could end up with all the candidates who are in one specific category without a diverse candidate pool.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're gonna find out really quick, because we have the interview scheduled 3 days after we get the slate anyway,
Just,
so.
I mean, that is one of the concerns with that.
Rochelle?
When you guys were at the meeting, did you guys have any of these discussions? Because there's such a big, they're all over the country. I'm assuming they probably were not the first board to maybe bring this up. So I think having this conversation will be a lot more enlightening to hear what their experiences have been, than us trying to turn people's eyes onto it.
Yeah, even if they haven't, if this is an opportunity for us to show leadership, I'm up for that too.
Susan?
I also think we have staff and teachers that have had these experiences, and that's part of the reach out that we're supposed to be doing. That's why I think Mike will have some good advice on that. But I think that's an important thought and question that we want to take to these people. And if they have a thought similar to Peter's, I think we want to hear it.
I agree. I'd definitely bring it to Mike. All right, were there any other discussion items regarding the superintendent search? Yes, Krishna?
Yeah, if I may just ask a question as a student to clarify, in a similar shadow, I suppose, to say affirmative action at a college, does any factors of an applicant such as race, sex, economic background, ethnicity, et cetera, already play a role in their hiring or not? Like what I'm getting at is depending on what background a person might be, are there any structural benefits or disadvantages that are factored into whether or not a candidate is hired based on those qualities, again, such as sex, ethnicity, et cetera, alone?
If I may, it's a really good, it's a complicated question everybody is struggling with, because, everybody, if you ask everybody, they'll say there is a bias. I mean, one of the problems is that there's been an opportunity bias. So it means people of color, women and so on, may have not had the opportunity to do things. And they might be very talented. They might be more talented, but they haven't been having the same opportunities as other candidates. And so how you factor that into your processes becomes very difficult and very complicated, and everybody's struggling with that. That's just one factor. And then there's also this issue of unconscious bias. These get in the process on how to deal with this and how to, correct for it, how to, get to a fair balance, a fair scale, is difficult. But one of my observations I would make is that I think that people tend to default to the safe choice, and the safe choice is the traditional choice. If there's some doubt, you go to the traditional choice. And the result is we short ourselves by not accessing talent that's out there. And if you ask me, the superintendents, people who rise to the top in organizations today who are underrepresented groups, are actually more talented than people who aren't. And that's because they've had to work harder, they've had to exceed, they've had to excel in areas that other people get to take for granted. So you sell yourself short if you're not careful, about this process.
So to clarify on that point, now theoretically, of course there is, I mean, not theoretically, I'll get to that point in a minute. Of course, with that, I understand a lot of opportunity bias that comes, as I said before. The opportunity is available to an individual, again, long before they ever apply for a job at our district. So with that, I wanted to ask the board that theoretically, does the school district in its hiring process have a role, or rather a responsibility to play in ensuring that we can analyze the talents of a candidate to perhaps balance out those opportunities that they have been denied in the past, again, theoretically, due to their backgrounds of any regard? Is this school district to stipulate that in its hiring processes or in its policies in general, we play a role in mitigating the effects of biases and other privileges in society?
I can comment on that. I'm going to speak for myself, though, not the other board members, and that I think when looking at candidates, I do think the experience has a lot to do with finding a qualified candidate and how they're going to be in this district. It's very difficult to just come out and say, you know, we're looking for a certain candidate. Like, we don't have something like the NFL, like a Rooney Rule, right? Where they have to interview a minority candidate for head coaching positions. We don't have a rule like that, so we don't have anything like that set up in this district. But for me, with candidates, I'll try to look at everything, and I feel of what you're referencing, Krishna, is we are each meeting with the HYA, and we have an opportunity to tell them what we might be interested in, what type of candidate we might be, you know, asking them to try to find. I can give you an example. For me, I do like to look at candidates that fall in a position of maybe they haven't had an opportunity or maybe they've been overlooked, but they're highly qualified. And like, for instance, it might be someone who, just an example, might be a teacher. Maybe they don't have an administrator role, but they have all the qualifications to be a superintendent. That could be a great candidate that is always overlooked because they don't have the experience piece. The experience piece is we see it, but they may have a lot of other experience that's important. So speaking for myself, I think that's something important that I want to see in the next superintendent. But, you know, I will meet with HYA and they'll ask me questions and I'll tell them, you know, this is what's important to me. This is what I think is going to be a good superintendent. And they will try to take that into consideration and look for those candidates. And then we'll look at the applications and we'll go through that process. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your perspective on that, so thank you. I wanted to ask that theoretical question because, of course, in real life, that's a much more complicated topic, which I'm sure you have addressed and faced several times in your work at the school board.
I mean, I also say that it's really difficult to hire anybody. And I think the best people have a 50% shot that it's going to work out. And you know, it's incredibly hard to do because you don't know the person. You don't have all the information. You know, like I mean, with the previous board 2-3 years ago hired Dan, they had some information, but they lucked out, you know, in getting someone that was great for this district. Not lucked out. I'm sure they put a lot of time and effort into it.
We just lucked
But
out there.
but I didn't mean it like that. But I mean, you know, it is a really difficult thing historically in every field to try to guess on who's going to be the best candidate. Because one person, I could think this person A is the best. Peter could think it's person B. Susan could think it's person C. And we could all be right or we could be wrong. So it's just a hard thing to do. And I mean, this is my first experience at doing it for a superintendent. So, but I have faith in the board, so.
Susan?
The language I think, again, it'd be really nice to have Krishna, because he hasn't been able to be at all the information sessions and the search, to be able to have, you know, really access to some of the good materials. And just for Krishna and the community, the language in the HYA proposal says, HYA commits to identifying, supporting, and placing school and district leaders of color and gender who have long been historically underrepresented in these posts. Candidates we slate, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual preference, must have recent, relevant, and demonstrated experience in successfully addressing opportunity gaps, leading with an equity lens, and advancing equity initiatives. And they go on to talk more about that. They're actively working with districts across the nation on equity initiatives and are part of creating and emerging best practices. So again, this is, it says more information about our firm's equity work can be accessed at hyasearch.com/equity-and-inclusion/. HYA is proud of the diversity of candidates hired with its assistance, including individuals of varied gender, race, ethnicity, culture, and religious background. HYA commits to identifying, supporting, and placing school and district leaders of color and gender who have long been historically underrepresented in these posts. That was part of their, again, and what I did, it's just because it's the way I work, the healthcare piece, I put all my major thoughts from each of the proposals into a grid and then put the page or the language. And equity was a major piece of what I looked at in the proposals. And there was one that a few of us favored, but the cost was moderately prohibitive. And the language that HYA gave us seemed to support that we were going to have that as a major component in the search, recruitment, and selection.
Thank you.
Great discussion. Were there any other points before we move on? Okay. All right, future meeting dates. So we have Teaching, Learning, and Equity on January 31st at 3, and then our regular board meeting on February 14th. Were there any other additions? Okay. All right, can I have a motion for adjournment?
Move we adjourn.
Second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it, motion carried.
You give me my charger back so I don't forget.
Thank you. Krishna, there's this interesting thing about buses, though, you asked them, and it's like really premature because
When I read it, I was like, oh.
throw this question out, because it takes a lot of thought process.